Hey everybody, it's Gavin Seim, and I cleaned up my shelf this week and my cameras. So I'm feeling good for today's video about the photos you're taking that are bad and that you're wasting your time on. And I know this hurts. So with digital, we can come in and we can do all this stuff and we can edit and we can see and we can manipulate and we do landscapes and we do portraits and we burn and we dodge and we do all this stuff and it works. And you can take a raw file that's inherently kind of plain, right? Use things like film as presets. Then I go over here and I do an elegance mask to bring back the sky. And we have AI tools and we have all of these things that in the film days, we didn't really have. There's something that we're missing. And that's why I'm always talking about shadow. Shadow is really important. I talk about it all the time here on the channel. Yeah, this is like a 15-year-old photo, is one of the early ones in my career, right around the first time I was starting pro photo podcasts and all that. It's not a bad photo. It was taken on a PowerShot G9. You notice that I converted this to black and white, very contrasty black and white. But here's what it started with. Do you see the problem with this photo? I see this in groups like the shadow hackers groups. And I'm not one of those, let's get on Facebook and just tear people's photos apart. If I critique a photo, I want to say something good about it. In fact, let me critique this photo from me from 15 years ago. Okay, this is cool. It's a little snapshotty, Gavin. I mean, like, there's nothing really exciting about the light, the sky. I mean, it's a great scene. I love that you kind of have the balance of the three horses here. This is cool. There's kind of some symmetry going on there, and that feels good. I really feel like it needs some shadow. Stop. This is the point, because I'm the shadow hacker guy. I'm the zones guy, right? I've been teaching zones, the expose workshop, now the shadow hackers, where we bring all that together. But here's what happens is I say, okay, this needs more shadow, and people watch my videos and they see and they think, okay, I just need to edit more. So I can go into this kind of nice but somewhat mediocre photo, and I could say, let's play with sliders. No, let's do a film preset. That's going to bring it alive. Okay, Agfa Flex from Filmist. This looks really cool. Bring some colors out. It actually does look quite a bit better. Maybe it's a little too intense. Let's go with something like Agfa Flex Vista, but still, maybe a vignette. Now I could do it manually, but I'm going to save the time. I'm more creative, just like you are if you use a preset. Okay, now I'm darkening it in. Just lacks a little shadow. Let's pull the blacks down and push the whites. Okay, is there shadow now? How about this? How about this version? It kind of just feels like we added contrast to the photo here, Gavin. It feels just kind of like it's better. It's got a little pop, but nothing's really drawing my eye. What's the subject? This is something I ask all the time, and sometimes it offends people. What's the subject? If I ask you what's the subject, it's because your subject isn't clear. You have rocks here in the foreground that are cool, and then you have a mediocre kind of messy sky, and it's supposed to be a big sweeping landscape. There's a reason that when you see these great Ansel Adams photos, they have these big billowing clouds, and the sky is this dominating focal point, and then the foreground in shadow and rocks and tones, right? It leads the eye, and everything has to lead your eye to the subject. And shadows are how we do that. Sure, we use light also, but the shadows really let us carve the light and see the light. That's something I'll show you in my Shadow Hackers workshop. But let's get back. It wasn't that I was a bad photographer. I've been doing photography for years. This was the early days of digital, right? We were trying to get our head of transitioning from this. Film naturally made us lean towards shadows because the ISOs were lower. We didn't just have a slider that we could push it up. And even now, if you shoot film, you'll start to discover more about your shadows because it will naturally have shadows, the emulsion, the silver. It brings out the shadows and it lets you see things. On the one hand, people are doing this nasty HDR where like everything's lifted and there's everything in the midtones and we just kind of crush it all. We crush everything until it's in the midtones. I can move this around all over the place from this 15-year-old raw file, and you know what? It looks pretty good, but it's still not a great photo. You can take a great photo and edit it well and make it truly amazing. But if you take a mediocre photo and edit it well, it's probably never going to be a great photo. Here's the final print edit that I did of this photo, right? This is one that I actually hang on the wall, which people liked the photo. I had this in my studio, and now when I look at it, I'm just like, oh, Gavin, it's so burned and dodged to death because I knew it. I'm like, no, this isn't quite working. I'm going to convert it to black and white. But I'm not just going to convert it to black and white and call it art. I knew I needed tone. I was kind of going for this kind of infrared tone. This is before I had really even discovered zones, right? And I'm working this until it kind of has this look. Now, if I was the student posting this to the group, I would be getting frustrated because I'd be saying, you're teaching me about shadow. You say I need more shadow. I need to separate my subject. I did that. And this is where I hit a hard point a lot of times with critique. And this is why I'm trying to really get us back to the fundamentals of, hey, forget about your bad photos. Don't confuse that with give up. But some photos, at least for now, I'm not saying delete them, but sometimes you need to leave a photo behind. Now, let's look at another photo. This looks like I screwed it up. It looks like I underexposed, but actually this was exposed for the zones and the highlights in the sky that I wanted to manage and the way I wanted the shadows to work out. This one, even though it looks bad, when it's edited correctly, like this, we have this very dynamic, huge HDR, and this was edited with natural HDR presets and then elegance, right? That helps me find these more complex edits faster. Going from this to this, it's important that you have a visualization, that you know what you're creating in this. And when you look at the actual finished result, we have shadow kind of here in the foreground. Your eyes go past these cactuses, which are a little darker. They see all this detail and they lead out to that brilliant sunset. I could go even further with this if I took it into Loomis and Alchemist and layers in Photoshop and pixel painting. So you have to understand that this is just a raw file, but it was exposed with a plan. Right? It was exposed correctly. It wasn't exposed to the right. How often have you gone out and take a photo and you really felt it emotionally and then you came back and it just wasn't there and you're like, oh, I just have to edit it. I just have to edit more. It's okay to say, you know what? I'm going to stop wasting my time editing this. It doesn't fulfill my visualization. I'm going to go try again. Now, I'm not saying delete it because there have been photos, not a lot, but sometimes things change. Processes improve. I start creating things like Filmus presets where my edits have so much more nuance and depth and subtlety, and photos that didn't work in the past with my new knowledge or new tools or improvement of technology, I can now do something with that works. I started seeing this pattern when I started studying the masters, the old classic photos, the Kodachromes, the film, and going back and studying the painters like I did, Albert Bierstadt and people like that, Hudson River School, all the way back to engravings, all the way back to Rembrandt in the 1600s. And I saw this pattern that the painters knew, and that's that they all used shadow. And when I started seeing this pattern, the first thing you want to do, and the first thing people tend to do when they come to my Shadow Hackers classes, is they just start darkening things. They start cranking up blacks and contrast, but you have to be subtle with this. And more than anything, yes, you can shadow hack in your editing, 100%, and you can hunt those shadows. But it starts here in the camera. It starts with having the shadows to begin with. Let's be honest, how many times have you gone out shooting at 11, 12 o'clock sun and you start seeing things, you're like, oh, this is cool, right? Especially for me that lives down here in Mexico. There's culture, there's so much color on the street, so I'm always taking photos, right? And yet this just isn't that great. It's a photo of like the meat market on the street corner, but there's nothing exciting about it. And when I started shadow hacking, I started realizing that I could analyze. I could look at something and say it's not exciting because the shadows are just gummy and they're blotching all over the place and they're mixing with the light. We have specular highlights, specular shadows. The light is harsh. There's nothing spotlighting our subject. And because we don't see the subject, because the subject is not being made the focal point by our shadows, we see nothing. And so then we can come and we can improve it in post. We can vignette, we can burn and dodge, we can use zones and luminosity masking or zones in something like Loomis and really have a more precise control over it. There's all these things. Those are important, and it's also fine just to experiment because it improves your edit. But nothing replaces when you expose for the shadow that you want that's going to give you that drama, right? If I had even obeyed the emitter on this and exposed brighter, I would have ended up with a much more boring image. The shadow is actually what makes this image because it draws our eyes away from the distractions and to those boats. But if I had shot this same photo in midday sun, no amount of editing that I would have done to it would have made it like, wow, that's really pretty. When you know what you're looking for and what you were visualizing because you actually were, you weren't just randomly shooting and spraying and praying, as we say. When you know what you're looking for in the photo, sometimes that photo will come back, a lot of times. And you'll have had a feeling in your heart, right? You had an emotion and you pull the photo up and you're like, it's not there. It's not working. Don't just stop there. This is why I think it's so important, not only for speed, but to use things like your presets and your actions, whatever your favorites are, right? Because when you browse over those, sometimes the way it mixes the tone, the color, the light transforms the image. So you've come in, you've taken a photo, and you have ideally a visualization. Maybe it was even a subconscious one, but we really should think about that visualization. Then you come back, and if the photo doesn't work, it seems flat, it seems plain, it seems distracting, right? Because maybe it wasn't right. You feel disappointed. You feel kind of this letdown of like, oh, these aren't as good as I thought they were on the postage stamp screen that I was looking at. I thought they looked really good. Sometimes then you have to switch up your visualization a little bit. And it's actually a good photo in hiding, and you're not seeing it because it didn't match your vision. But a lot of times, it just didn't work. I don't agonize anymore about a photo that didn't work. Now, if it's a photo that I have to get out for a client or something like that, sure, I'm going to go to work, and I know I can improve it, and I can make it usable. It may never win a prize, but it's going to be a usable photo as long as I had it in focus, okay? But if I'm shooting for art, for street, for landscape, for beauty, to share things, I want my best work. I don't just want to put a bunch of junk out there. So it's okay to say no. It's okay to say, you know what? This isn't working. Now, you might come back 5 years later and say, you know what? I'm seeing that in a different way now. I've done that a lot of times. But more likely, you'll come back 5 years later, and the images that really worked, they really worked. And you're going to be like, oh yeah, these were right there. I'm glad I printed them. I was right on the money with these. And the other ones, you're going to say, oh, wow, I've improved a lot. What I'm getting at here is you can't just edit bad photos until they're good. I have a lot of photos that I plan well in camera. I'm exposing for the highlights. I'm using zones. And when they come out of the camera, especially Sony RAW files, man, they're flat. They're just so flat. And yet, when I get my finished product from that single file, it's completely different. But you know what? I didn't actually take a bad photo. The photo was exactly what I wanted because I was planning and visualizing. But those other photos that don't work, in the past, I would agonize over those. And I would say, no, this isn't a great photo, but I can make it great. No, that's very unlikely to happen. And it's also going to become a crutch for you. You go out and you take a photo of a neat thing and you're like, oh, there's no tone, there's no shadow, the light is super flat and boring, so I'm going to burn and dodge it to death. There's no need. And I see this all the time in the groups, and I try to be gentle about it, but really what I'm saying is, well, where's the subject? Where's the shadow? Oh, I'll go darken it. But you're never going to end up with a photo that really satisfies you. This has a very similar contrasty theme of that failed photo I just showed you, right? In terms of the way that the plants are kind of illuminated, the water is really contrasted, there's deep blacks. But what's the difference? This photo was exposed correctly. It was exposed with the plant and the light, that it was early morning sunrise light, the shadow mixing with that light. And so with this, I could work with it, right? I could go to silver presets and browse over those mixes and find the right conversion and be like, yeah, this works. And then I could refine that. The difference is that one wasn't actually very good out of camera and the other one was. So there's 3 things you need to do to make this easy. Number 1 is don't be afraid to say no to a photo, to say, you know what? This is a bad photo. And I'm not going to make it great by pummeling it to death in Photoshop and Lightroom and Capture One. Number 2 is you need to start hunting your shadows. You need to start looking for those shadows and asking yourself questions. Do those shadows contribute to the subject? Do they bring everything together? And you need to start visualizing those. And 3, then you can combine that visualization, whether you're scanning film, whether you're shooting digital, it doesn't matter because you have that vision. You should be flexible with that vision in case maybe you need to change it. Maybe you find something better after. You don't have to lock yourself in and make a bunch of rules for yourself. But if you start thinking in this 1, 2, 3 process of, okay, visualization, shadows, balanced editing, and I want you to be willing to say to yourself, this is a bad photo. I'm not going to fix it. And not be offended if someone else says it to you. It was really hard for me early on because, yeah, I had quite a bit of ego. Thought I was better than I was. It took me a lot of study and trial and error and studying with other masters to figure out that it's okay to fail. And it's okay to admit, you know what? That one didn't work. Sometimes we try to fix it in post and we make it as good as we can because we need it for our client. But it's important that we recognize what's happening with our photos so that we can make better photos in camera, which will then be better photos in post with proper editing. And it's not always what you think. But if you start looking for those recipes and visualizing those things in your photos, it's going to get a whole lot easier. And when I started doing that, that's when I started getting photos like this that I could print, and I could print big, and I could sell, and I could put on walls, and it completely transformed the way that I made photos because I wasn't always just having this mindset of take a bunch of photos and then edit them to death. It was like, no. I'm going to wait, because if I get one good one, I'm happy. My day is a success. And I stopped just doing this and ending up with boring photos that I was just trying to edit to make beautiful. And it never really worked. They always felt like I was just punishing them. And eventually I discovered shadow hacking, and we'll cover this more. This is kind of actually a primer to my shadow hacking classes. So definitely come to one of my shadow hacking webinars if you haven't been there. I'll put a link down in the comments. Please like and subscribe. Let me know if this made you think at all, if it kind of knocked over some dominoes or turned on some lights in your head, because this is important stuff. And once we understand it, everything gets so much easier. All right, peace, guys. We'll see you next time.